Well, is the country of Poland collapsing under the weight of the war in Ukraine? According to reports, the largest fighting force of non-Ukrainians fighting in Ukraine are the Poles. Poland has been funneling tanks, weapons, large numbers of troops into Ukraine, but the government is keeping quiet about what's happening. Mike Krupa is a columnist, a historian, host of Votum TV. He's been covering this story deeply, and he's joining us today from Poland. Mike, welcome to the show. Great to have you here.
Great to be here. Welcome, everybody.
So, there's a lot of, I think, ignorance about this topic. When we've covered Poland here on the show, we've gotten so many Polish viewers who have said, thank you for telling this story. We're not getting this information in Poland. The government is being quiet about it. The media is being quiet about it. Why is this story about Poland, just at a high level, being kept quiet? And then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of what's happening.
Well, I think the fundamental problem is that not only the government-run media, especially the state-run television, the TVP, but most of the private media that are sponsored by, some of them at least are sponsored by American capital, they're all in the same on the same terrain of opinion, if you will, when it comes to Ukraine. So they're basically saying the same thing, that Vladimir Putin is a dictator, that Ukraine is a beacon of democracy, and the only way that we can end this war is bring peace by sending more weapons to Ukraine. That's the basic line that's coming from the mainstream. So thankfully, we have the internet, we have YouTube, we have Rumble, we have alternative sources of information. More and more people are reaching out and starting to say to themselves that, this war has been dragging on since February 24th. We're not seeing any tangible benefits for Poland, not geopolitically, not economically, not diplomatically, not demographically, as the latest statistics from the border service from yesterday, I believe, claimed that since February 24th, now this is just going one way, so some of them might have come back, but we have had just under 10 million Ukrainians crossing the Polish border into Poland.
10 million?
10 million. Now, that doesn't mean that there are 10 million Ukrainians in Poland, but these are just the crossings coming into Poland. So some of them have left, some of them have went further west. However, it is estimated that right now, as we sit here today, there are about 5 million Ukrainians in total in Poland. And that includes the large population of about 2 million that were already in Poland before the war, working as immigrant labor in our factories, in our corporations, and so on and so on. So the reason why a lot of people are thanking such alternative voices as you for getting this information out, especially to the world, is that I think the general opinion of a lot of people in the West, and not only the West, I think in the East also, is that Poland and most of the Poles are fervently anti-Russian and fervently for this project of using Ukraine as a proxy, as a battering ram, in essence, against Russia. And that is definitely not the case. That's the message that I would like to get out there to the international audience, that we are not all, how should I say this, neoconned in Poland, thankfully. It's definitely a trend in the big cities, among NGOs that are paid from Western sources, among our government, which is shilling for the globalist elites, which are having their little sabbatical right now in Davos, and people who have this ideological fixation that believe that Poland's destiny is to fight Russia until the end of time. We can go into a large discussion about where this stems from, but if you combine those factors all together, it's projection. It's the government, it's the media, but if you were to present the Poles, an average Pole, the situation as it is today, do you want to die for the corrupt regime in Kiev and use up Poland's resources to go back another 200 years in progress? The majority of Poles, the typical Kowalski on the street, will tell you, hell no.
And yet it's happening, isn't it? I mean, this is what we're seeing. So they'll say hell no, but this is what's happening. Can you talk a little bit about actually what's happening, what resources, what troops, what are the people of Poland suffering under right now that is pouring into Ukraine?
Well, I think I've been interested in this and following the situation from even before the war, because I think demographics is destiny, obviously. Now, the major issue in Poland right now, in terms of what everybody is seeing, is that you're hearing Ukrainian and Russian everywhere in Poland. So we're sort of becoming a multicultural state for the first time after 1989, whereby you have NGOs, the media, and politicians saying that it's something positive for Poland to be a binational, sort of Ukraino-Polish project. And nobody has ever signed up for this. There was never any election on this, any referendum. It just happened after basically overnight after February 24th, where we're hearing politicians speaking, well, we can have more and more Ukrainians in Poland. Maybe we can even erase the border between Poland and Ukraine. There are suggestions going in that direction, and somehow geopolitically rebuild the Polish-Ukrainian Commonwealth as a bulwark against Russia, financed by NATO and obviously by the United States. So this isn't a message that's being stated the way I just said, but there are there are hints at this from a lot of these politicians, that anybody that is complaining against this huge influx of Ukrainians, rich or poor, refugee or not, because after February 24th, we had a wide open border, so anybody could come in. Right now, some controls have come back, but for example, we have information from the Polish Ministry of Social Works that there's a lot of Ukrainians in Poland that, for example, are abusing the social system, just like illegal immigrants in the States. So they're taking money in Poland and they're going back to Ukraine, even though they're claiming they're refugees while crossing the border. So there's a lot of this craziness going on. So I would say this project of flooding Poland with millions of Ukrainians, that's the first problem we have to work out, because that'll destroy our national identity. It'll destroy the state, and it'll bring back conflicts that are very reminiscent of what we had before World War II. I mean, the history of Poland and Ukraine is not is not a sweet history, to say the least. So that's one thing. The other thing is we have signed up as a state to be, not only are we a NATO stooge, but we are also the most mad of the NATO stooges, so to say, in the sense that we are actually calling, if we are to believe a recent report by Der Spiegel, for an active campaign to weaken Russia, which aligns obviously with what Lloyd Austin said when he was in Poland in April, that our goal in Ukraine is to weaken Russia to the extent that she will never be able to do something like this again. However, the government in Poland really wants to take this a bit further and actually escalate. Now, you asked also about Polish soldiers in Ukraine. I can't give you figures for now because we simply don't know. I know that there's a lot of volunteers from Poland that have gone to Ukraine to fight. They have been brought back. Their deaths have been announced publicly. However, if we are to believe Russian sources on the other side, and there are many independent voices saying this, the Chechens, the regular Russians fighting over there, that when they turn on the radio comms, they're hearing a lot of Polish chatter, not Ukrainian, not Russian, but Polish chatter. And what's funny, I think Scott Ritter yesterday on his Scott Ritter show, when he was talking to an American expat living in Russia, he said that when he was on the front, they noticed that during Catholic Christmas, so around 24th, 25th of December, there's basically a pause in fighting. Whereas, the Ukrainians have Orthodox Christmas, which is a week later. So they they knew that the guys on the other side weren't Orthodox Ukrainians, but because you had the pause, they were most likely Roman Catholic Poles celebrating Christmas.
Wow. So you're hearing all of this chatter on the radio, so much so that Russians are reporting the people we're hearing, it's not Ukrainians anymore. Right. The Ukrainian army largely decimated, as we've been covering here on the show. So, of course, you're having, from the reports that I'm seeing, one of the largest contingents of foreign fighters in Ukraine are Poles. What is the response among the average Polish citizen about this? And when they report these death figures on the news, do they? How much? What are they actually saying about this?
The reporting that I've seen on social media about two guys that went down, I think it was end of October, beginning of November, because they were fairly notorious on Twitter, at least one of them was that, they died for a free Ukraine, they died for a freedom, fighting against the orcs, the Russians. But if you look at the commentaries below such posts on social media, I would say about 80% of them are negative, in the sense that a lot of people are saying, hey, nobody forced him to go there. He was a volunteer fighting for a foreign cause. He was a mercenary. He wasn't a soldier. He doesn't deserve, any national pride, any national honors going back to Poland, because he wasn't a soldier of Poland. So, if you're a soldier of fortune, if you're a mercenary, well, that's your choice. But don't call this deed heroic, and don't start making, creating these legends around these people that they were somehow fighting for Poland's freedom, when in essence they were fighting a NATO proxy war against Russia. Let's just call it what it is. So at least from what I see in the social media sphere, people, now I can't obviously differentiate who's a troll and who's not a troll, but generally speaking, the attitude is negative, that we shouldn't be making these guys into heroes because they weren't dying for any identifiable real Polish national interest.
You mentioned the fraught relationship between Ukraine and Poland. It's been difficult. Anne Reid, I want to read a quote from Anne Reid's book, Borderland, on this and see if you agree with this. We'll put this up here on the screen, where she says in her book, Ukraine's relationship with Poland is difficult and contradictory. For 500 years, they shared a common history, first under the Polish kings, then under the Russian czars. But like rival siblings, they define themselves more by their differences than their similarities. Poland, glamorous and self-dramatizing. Ukraine, inarticulate and put upon. Ukraine resents Poland for hogging the limelight. Poland resents Ukraine for stealing its lines. Ukrainians, like the Irish, rebelled against their Polish landlords at every opportunity. Poles, like the English, responded with a curious mixture of affection, scorn, and fear. Does that sum it up? Anything you would add or detract from?
Basically, I'm obviously biased, although I hail from a region of Poland, Subcarpathia, which was heavily Ukrainized at one point, in the sense that you had a lot of neighbors living next to each other, especially in the interwar period. Now, an important note, because before World War II, we didn't have such a term as Ukrainian. The people that we identify as Ukrainian today were actually called Ruthenians from Rus, from Ruthenia. So before the war, a lot of these Ruthenians, they had obviously their religious and ethnic heritage tracing to ancient Rus, what is now called Ukraine, Kievan Rus, and many of them were Greek Catholic, not Roman Catholic, but they identified at the same time as loyal Polish citizens. So there was even this saying, it was later translated into Latin, and it was very popularized that, by background, I'm a Ruthenian, but by nationality, I'm a Pole. So you can combine those two identities into one and still remain a loyal citizen of the Republic. However, in the 1930s, and obviously the culmination was in 1942, 1943, the Ukrainian nationalist movement headed by such vile people as Stepan Bandera, unfortunately, with the help of Nazi Germany, created a movement and an ideology whereby separating Ukrainianism from Poland and from Russia became one of the main goals, to create this great Ukraine, Wielka Ukraina, something that would be an independent entity, and that would take away what they claimed were historic Ukrainian lands from the Russians as well as the Poles. So unfortunately, people like Bandera instilled a lot of bad blood between the Poles and the Ukrainians. It's worth mentioning, obviously, the Volhynia massacres, where over 100,000 Poles were slaughtered in ways that not even the Germans and the Soviets could have invented. I highly recommend. All you have to do is Google Volhynia genocide that occurred in the early 40s. So Bandera unfortunately poisoned this relationship. Now, I'm not saying that the authorities of the Second Republic, the Second Polish Republic, before the war were innocent of in terms of integrationist politics with these Ruthenians. But the majority of hatred and the blood that was spilled in the early 40s came from the Banderite camp, from the followers of Bandera, from what a lot of scholars call integral Ukrainian nationalism, which in essence was basically a Ukrainian form of Nazism. So in general, I would agree with Reid's assessment. And that's why these dangerous ideas of creating a Ukraino-Poland, of some, idyllic, peaceful settlement between two nations in one nation or in one state are utopian and dangerous.
Let me get you out of here on this, which is this idea that Ukraine will not exist for much longer, that this war is over. We had Scott Ritter on the show yesterday saying that it is over, and that what's left, of course, will be just, again, mass carnage for a year, 2 years as this drags out. But for all intents and purposes, the war is over, and then what's left is the deciding factor of how Ukraine will be carved up. There's been quite a few discussions about the idea of Western Ukraine becoming part of Poland taking over part of Western Ukraine, and then Russia moving and taking all the way up to Odessa. Do you see that happening? What do you get? Do you see a sense of that unfolding, or is that just a lot of speculation, wild speculation?
I haven't seen anybody in the Polish government, nor from my sources in Warsaw, in the Polish parliament, making such claims. However, there are certain tendencies that might lead to a situation, because, as I said, we are a raving dog among the NATO stooges, unfortunately. We might see a situation where, and Doug McGregor alluded to this a few weeks ago in context of what General Petraeus said about the so-called coalition of the willing, of a few NATO countries going into Western Ukraine, but not under NATO umbrella. I can conceive a potential situation where the refugee, for example, wave will be so big, and the offensive that is definitely coming from the Russians will be so hard on the Ukrainians and so striking and so surprising in many ways that the only way to cordon off the Ukrainian refugees coming into Poland will be to set up a protectorate, which will be guaranteed by, for example, a contingent of American forces, Polish forces, and possibly Romanian forces in Western Ukraine that'll be under their governance. Now, what will be the reaction of Belarus to that? What will be the reactions of the Russians? Hard to say at this point, but I can conceive of a situation, and a lot of tendencies are going in this direction, in the sense that, there's a huge NATO military presence in southeastern Poland, especially on the airport in Rzeszów. I mean, every day they're bringing in military equipment. Everything that's going to Ukraine is going through Rzeszów, basically, through southeastern Poland. So I can conceive of a situation where a protectorate is, for example, established, not officially by NATO, but by those three countries under the patronage of Joe Biden's White House. But what happens after, whether we keep that, whether that is returned to the Ukrainians as a sort of rump state, whether Odessa remains with Ukraine, determining whether they have access to the sea, is an open question. However, I wouldn't rule that out. But I don't see at this point anybody in Poland making public statements whereby it'll be a great thing for Poland and for our national pride if we take over Western Ukraine. That's speculation, in my opinion. But as I said, things are moving very quickly. It could change within weeks, months.
And maybe they won't say it publicly.
Most likely. They're not saying a lot of things publicly.
I was going to say they're keeping a lot of stuff close to the vest at this point, but it'll be interesting to watch. Where can people, Mike, find out more of your great reporting, your great journalism, and what you're doing right now?
Well, you can follow me on Twitter. It's at MG Krupa, all small letters. I also do podcasts with a lot of the same guests as you do. Great American Voices, just Scott Ritter, Douglas McGregor, at Votum TV. You can find us on YouTube. We do live streams mostly every week. And you can also read some of my works that have been published in Consortium News, The American Conservative, and Chronicles, a magazine of American culture, among others. So, but Twitter is basically where I put out all my information. So at MG Krupa.
Wonderful, Mike. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Great insight, and we will continue to stay on this story and continue to give light to something that I think is deeply important and quite frankly been silenced. So thank you for all of your great coverage on this as well.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thanks so much, Mike. Really appreciate it. And thanks to all of you for engaging on this, because it's such an important topic that's not getting any coverage in the mainstream media at all. What's happening right now in Poland, a total disaster.
Yeah, and it's great to give perspective to this, especially because the mainstream media likes to paint Poland as this sort of willing participant, as cannon fodder. And,
the people
who would
don't
want
that. The people don't want it.
Who would vote for that? Yeah, especially with your family, with your lives.
Yeah, it's really troubling. So thanks to Mike for that. Thank you so much for watching this segment here at Redacted. We are live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern time, trying to share the stories that the mainstream media will not cover. You should also come over and join our community of Redacted Rebels over at redacted.inc. That's our private locals community where we can share exclusive content that we simply cannot share here on YouTube. Come over and join the rebellion together right now by going to redacted.inc. We'll see you next time.